Hello everyone, and I am actually back. I appreciate all of the good feelings and good words. Hey, Linda DB, so glad to see you today. Appreciate everyone, all the reach outs, the videos, the cards, all of those things after my grandmother passed. Um, you guys, I'm lucky to be part of this community, so I'm very blessed. But tonight, I have a very special guest. We are going to be talking to Amy Loughren. Amy is, and I was just talking to her a minute ago, in my mind, a hero in more ways than one. For one, she served as a nurse. And, guys know how I feel about nurses. They do things that I could never do, things that I kind of run away from they run towards and I'm just in awe. Plus they don't get as much credit as they should. They don't get as much attention as they should. But part of the reason that Amy is even more of a hero is she was instrumental in securing the conviction of Charlie Cullen, who is one of America's most prolific serial killers. He was actually a nurse who was deciding to unalive patients seemingly kind of at will. And depending on the count, he has caused 40 to over, even I've seen estimates of 1,000 people to leave this earth prematurely. So, hey, Texas Jen. Hey, Terry K. There is currently two, not one, but two Netflix videos and movies out. One's documentary style, and one is more of a, I'm going to say, sensationalized version. The other thing you might want to check out is The Good Nurse. It's a book by Charles Graeber, and I hope I said his name right. It talks about how they caught Charlie, but the basic is he's the first known victim was John Yango in 1988. And from there, he embarked on going to 9 different hospitals. Nine, just kind of put that in your head, 9 different hospitals. And each time, basically, when he left, the hospital before either gave him a what I would call a neutral reference. So I'm going to welcome Amy and Wolfie. Is that the little puppy's name in the back?
Yes, little
Yeah.
Wolfie.
So we are all dog people in, or at least animal people here. So, Amy, thank you. Let you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, everyone. Now that this movie is out and the documentary, I have been mostly traveling. And what happened with Charles Cullen was 20 years ago. It
Hmm.
happened in 2003. After it all went down, I dealt with so much guilt because Charlie was not just a fellow nurse and coworker, he was also one of my very closest friends. And I did not see what was happening right in front of me. It wasn't that I was blind to it, and it also wasn't that he was truly trying to hide everything. It's just not the first thing that you go to when you see
Oh,
that
yeah.
you think about little things that happen, but you don't go straight to, oh my goodness, I think that one of my best friends is murdering the patients right in front of me. So sorry.
No,
Okay.
trust me. Anyone watching me is used to that. Because, like I said, I have four boxers that are usually wandering around here somewhere. So let's kind of talk about that. And I know it's been over 20 years, but let's go back a little bit. So, for those who don't know and haven't seen, I saw where some have watched the documentary themselves or watched it this week. Hey, Texas Jen. Says hello, Tish and Amy. I've been looking forward to this. We're glad. I've been looking forward to this as well, and
Oh,
very honored that you agreed to come on. So, for those who don't know, basically what he had been doing was um, killing individuals with medication that was not prescribed to them. A little bit of a mix of, and I'm not a nurse. This is going to be obvious when I say these names, but
it's
digit,
okay.
epinephrine,
Digoxin. Mhm.
digoxin, and insulin. And I will be honest that when I first heard of him years ago, I thought that it was, as I've heard said, mercy killings, but they weren't mercy killings. These are people that were definitely in serious condition, but had hope of leaving and going back to their families, and
Yes.
at the very least, should have had more time with their families than when they did.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I was reading Charles Graeber's book. It just seems like it was almost like like some of us may stress eat, we may stress drink, we may even some people do some self-harm, which again, we have this warning called cellophane warning, meaning maybe content we don't want little kids in the room to be able to see. It seems like that was almost a way of relieving stress for him.
I think that you're definitely onto something. I do believe, and he never told me this, although I don't think anyone's going to ever get any answers. He refuses to have anyone study him. Um, I believe he did have some type of obsessive compulsive disorder that just went really bad.
Mhm.
And he had a very challenging childhood, and his very first time that he attempted to harm someone, he was only 9 years old.
Yeah,
So
a
you know that it
boyfriend.
went very deep.
Yeah, he was really close to his mother, had a good relationship to
Mhm.
her, but from what I read, did not grow up in a great area. His sisters had several boyfriends in and out, and he actually attempted to poison one of those at the 9 years old. Several instances off and on of trying to unalive himself very, very young. First time that is actually in the book it is when he stole one of those old chemical kits from a church auction or some kind of church thing. My husband and I joke about those because we used to buy those things for kids that were actually dangerous.
Yes, so
We would
dangerous.
never do that now,
Yeah.
but they weren't the strengths that would unalive him. We're saying that for YouTube algorithm. They don't like certain words. Not
Okay.
enough to do that with, but enough to make him sick. So from there, he went into the military, did okay there. It seems like to me too, at least the book makes it sound like he was craving some kind of structure. It talked about, being happy about having the white navy uniform that no one else had had.
I I think initially he did okay in the Navy. However, he also was severely bullied and did attempt multiple times to unalive himself there.
Yeah, yeah. So from there, he decides to go into nursing in a time where honestly there wasn't as many men in the nursing field. So he kind of stood out, found some leadership there, and then started working at the hospitals. And what kind of angered me, saddened me, and also perplexed me is it seems like, and again, I'm pulling a lot from more from the book than the movie, just because I know how movies tend to sensationalize a little bit just because they're a movie, even though the movie's very well done. Going from the book, it seems like everyone at least had a suspicion, if not an absolute, yes, he's harming patients, and they just kept moving him on.
Well, in Charles Graeber's book, he does outline beautifully
Mhm.
how they kept doing this. At least five hospitals knew at least that he was harming people, if not truly doing things to push along their demise. And they knew and didn't do anything about it, all because of money, all because
Yeah,
they would be
the liability of it, and,
yeah.
you can kinda see that, but at the same time, to me, from the very first time he was passed on, so to speak, there was no telling how many people it could have stopped really, really early. So tell me about the Charlie that you knew as a friend. Let's take away the things we know about him now. But and in no hindsight's not perfect. But talk to me about when you first met Charlie. What was he like then?
Charlie was shy. He was very, very soft spoken. He was funny. He had a great sense of humor, very sardonic, an excellent teammate. He talked about his daughters a lot and how much he cared for his daughters and how much he really loved being a father. He talked a lot about his current girlfriend at the time. And watching him at work, he knew so much about nursing, about medications, about coding people. And I learned so much from him. We truly were best friends at work.
Hmm.
He was my work husband.
Right. I know what you mean. Yeah. I think we all, you know, come across people that we get closer to
Yeah.
than others at work just because we click or because of their knowledge, or even as you, the more experienced nurse, you didn't have to shadow over him as much because it was obvious, quite obvious that he knew what he was doing and he was very serious about his work. Um, was there anything, I know that he was described in the book by some of the other nurses as being um, a little everything from weird, and then I saw later eccentric. So, were there some of the things that he would do at first that would show you, hey, he's very methodical about everything that he does?
There were several things. One in particular is that he would not come to the nurses' station to be with the rest of the nurses unless I was there or unless his other best friend Donna was there. Um, Also, he was always in the patient's rooms. A lot of us would come to the desk to document or just come to the desk to get something to eat or drink or go to the bathroom. And he never did that, not unless we truly coaxed him in. Um, he was very, very quiet,
Okay.
and I took that as he did have some type of darkness, and I did feel that. I just thought that it was some type of depression, but the night shift is weird anyway,
Yeah.
and it tends to draw people who are more introverted. And so I just saw him as just another fellow nursing vampire.
Yeah, yeah, because I have actually my son's aunt was on the night shift for a long time and talking about how different, that can be from the day shift and the
Yeah.
night vampire, as you say. So from you, you sense a little bit of darkness, some depression, which he talked about depression a lot with a lot of different people. Of course, it was always from his point of view, of course, with his ex-wife, the daughters, all of that kind of thing. But I almost wonder if would shy be a good description around people that he didn't click with?
Shy, and it was also quite obvious if he did not have respect for someone, or if someone did not have respect for his expertise, he would just not really speak to them. And again, we didn't really need to. Um,
Yeah.
he didn't need to.
Okay.
It
And
wasn't there was no red flag. I worked with a lot of medical people that are a little bit odd, and he was just one of those. I thought maybe he's on the spectrum, and who
mhm.
knows? He was just so smart.
Well, and the book describes you as a self-proclaimed badass. I love that line. So, what do you think it was that drew, other than the fact that you would, obviously work in really close proximity to each other? What do you think it was about you and Donna, for that matter? Which Donna tends to not be talked about quite as much, but with both of you, what do you think caused him to gravitate towards you as far as a friendship goes? Other than the fact that obviously you're very everything that I read, you're very good at what you do. You're very organized. Call things like you see it. Don't put up with a bunch of BS. What do you think it was that made him gravitate towards trusting you more?
I believe a lot of it was that we did have the same sense of humor. And I am always drawn to those shy, introverted, nerdy types.
Hmm.
And he could feel how much I needed his knowledge because I love people who are smarter than me, and I was always in charge. I was always in charge of the code team. I just always had that intense responsibility, and knowing that he was the person that I could rely on, I think he enjoyed that. And Donna was a new nurse, so
Okay.
she really relied on him, and every question that she had, she would go to Charlie.
Yeah, he
So
seemed to there seemed to be a thread throughout the book and even, throughout the documentary of he needed to feel needed.
yes,
Yeah.
and I do believe he enjoyed that, and he definitely is, quite narcissistic, and so I really believe he enjoyed us our adoration.
Well, and narcissists can come with incredible intelligence too. And it sounds like he at least earned that part, which
Yes,
was, he really dialed into the craft. He really studied. He really,
absolutely,
wanted to be the expert and probably could have gone on to do a lot of other things had he not gone this route. Um,
absolutely.
so talk to me about how did it feel? And I'm thinking I'm one of these people that I think anyone is capable of doing anything under the right or wrong set of circumstances, meaning people are never completely good, they're never completely bad. You know, think of the worst person on earth and someone was their friend, somebody loved them. So when the detectives started investigating him and then they talked to you, tell me how that meeting went. So they basically knew he was unaliving patients. They knew that something was going on, but they lacked the ability to be able to pinpoint any reason. The risk liaison, I'm going to call her, trying to be kind, had indicated that the records could not be retrieved because the machine that tracked the medication, I guess, erased itself after 30 days, which ended up not being true. But tell me how that very first meeting went.
I really did not understand what the investigation was about. In my
'Cause they had
mind,
started kind of clamping down on all of you as far as the medication distribution and
yeah,
dispensing, and even at one point, I read trying to get you to sign something that you were like, "No, this is stupid, I'm not doing this,"
and
when it came to giving out medication?
yes.
Okay.
Yes. At one point, they put the insulin in the narcotic drawer. So when we pulled out insulin, we had to sign for how many units were left in the bottle. And I said, there's no possible way that we can know how many units are in the bottle.
How in
Uh,
the world would you even I have members of my family that are diabetic and take insulin, so, I mean,
yeah.
I don't know how you would look at a bottle and know exactly that.
Yes.
I don't even
So
know if that's possible.
unless you change it to just that we are taking out a certain number, but I'm not signing that I know how much is in there. And actually, Charlie was the person who pulled me aside and said, "Stop making waves, stop." And my manager said the same thing to me. She said, "This is not about you. You need to stop." So whatever was going
So
on
did you think it was about you, or did you think it was a
before.
hospital putting on a layer of bureaucracy that was stupid?
So at the time, what was happening is every morning we would get our lab results back. We would draw blood on all of our patients and
Okay,
get results back for morning report.
okay.
And our lab results were coming back, and all of our patients, sometimes there would be 12 or 15 patients with a low blood sugar, like a low blood sugar, like a blood sugar of 12, a blood sugar of 3. Like,
And for those of you who may not understand, I mean, my husband even gets very, I'm going to say, stressed if it's in the 60s and 50s. So if you're talking about something that's, down 312, that
anything, yes,
that's
anything,
that's life threatening and critical, and basically it can result in essentially lots of problems in your brain. It is not a pleasant experience whatsoever.
no, and anything under 60 needs to be treated. So we were blaming the lab. We thought that there was something wrong with the lab. So in my mind, that's what it was when they were trying to figure out the insulin, is perhaps it was the lab. And then Charlie was fired not long after that, and then the investigation started. So
Okay.
the only thing that I could imagine they would be investigating would be perhaps narcotics. It never occurred to me that they would be thinking that someone was harming people.
Well,
And
and two, when Charlie told you, "Hey, quit fighting this, just sign it," I'm sure to me, I would think it's just my friend trying to look out for me. That wouldn't even
of
bring up a
course,
red flag to me at all.
yes, of course. And also because I was just so verbal about everything and making sure that our patients were safe, I was always a pain in the butt to the physicians that were not doing what they should be doing. And I had no problem telling them that. And no one intimidated me. So Charlie really wanted me to chill out. And of course, now I know why, and
Right.
he
But
did
but
not
even in
want me
hindsight,
implicated.
even knowing what I even know, for him telling you, chill out, that would be a hey, let's not make a big deal on this one because it's not about
Of
it's not
course.
about you. But at the same time, it would feel like another layer of something else that you're having to do where you're spending your time where you could be spending time with patients. Rather
Yes,
than
of course.
spending the time with patients, you're spending, you know, your bandwidth is only so big to start with, and then they're adding on something else. So he was fired shortly after that. So in the book and actually in the movie, it describes them coming in and speaking with you, but it was in front of the risk director. So how did that conversation unfold?
The risk manager essentially coached me before I went in to talk with the detectives, and also made it very clear that we were not supposed to be talking to the detectives without a hospital representative, that it could be harmful to us. And so everyone was pretty scared to talk to them unless we had a representative with
And there
us.
had been several nurses that they had brought in and talk. And if you're outside looking in, and, knowing what I know, because my father was an attorney and a judge, my husband was a law enforcement officer for decades. You know, talking to authorities is something I would even go into with a grain of salt, just because of the way things tend to get turned around. And, I was listening to one of our law tube friends talk about, a lot of times prosecutors are after scalps versus trying to get the right thing. So to me, her coaching you that way wouldn't have even seemed weird at the time.
No, and it didn't. It didn't until I saw some of the evidence. And my representative, the risk manager, had to leave during my interview. And Danny Baldwin, who was the lead investigator, because I was so opinionated and because I was very, very verbal about this investigation was a witch hunt. And when my representative left, Danny decided to bring me in on some of the evidence.
Well, and
And
from Danny's perspective, he was quoted and kind of paraphrased too in the book as saying, they were looking for one they could count on, because they didn't have the background in the medical knowledge to they knew something's wrong, but they don't know what's wrong. And they're looking for the one. So, Tim Braun and Danny Baldwin, um, why do you think they very quickly figured out that you would be the one? Was there a camaraderie when you were talking to them, or was it just your strength that was showing through? What do you think it was at that? Because they trusted you with information they didn't trust everyone else with.
Danny and Tim have told me many times the reason that they brought me in was because I was so tough. And it was also because I was the only one that had already talked to Charlie after Charlie was let go from the hospital. And so they knew that if they could bring me on and perhaps start a conversation with him that they could listen in on, that there may be a way to get more information
And
from
at
him.
this point, you're still in regular contact with Charlie because even though Charlie's been let go, at this point, he'd been let go, depending on the way you want to look at it, 5 to 9 times. So, and every time it seems like there's this thread of him thinking, okay, they're going to catch me. Okay, well, they aren't doing anything. So I'm just going to. So at this point, despite the fact that he had been terminated again, he wasn't that worried. Would that be a fair statement? Or
I
did
think
this feel different to him?
I think he was worried
Okay.
because he also knew that they were already investigating him at the hospital. He knew
Okay.
because they had pulled him in to ask him questions before he was let go. And so he already knew that there was something going on. And I had told him that I would give him a reference. He was also worried because he had a lot of bills and
Yeah, a
he
lot of
had
child support payments, that
child
had
he had
been
back.
way behind on. Yeah,
Yes.
and another baby on the way, I believe?
Not yet.
Not
Not
yet?
yet.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay,
Mhm.
at this point. So, how does that conversation feel? I mean, even though and, basically, they showed you the information from Pyxis, and Pyxis is kinda like a cash register for medication. Somebody was asking how Pyxis works, so do you mind walking through what Pyxis is?
So the Pyxis does look like just a very big cash register, and you type in a patient's name. And at the time, back in 2003, before we redesigned it, that would, once you would type in the patient's name, it would come up with a list of medications. You highlighted the medication that you wanted, and then a drawer would pop open. And in that drawer, there could be insulin right next to something as innocuous as toothpaste. So the way that Charlie was pulling out the medications was he would type in toothpaste, and instead of taking the toothpaste, he would take the other medication.
So it was
Or
keeping track, but not really because once you're in, you can grab anything.
you can grab anything, which is also interesting because some of the medications that he took out, which were lethal, he was taking out in an exorbitant amounts, and he wasn't hiding it. He was actually showing that he was taking all of those medications out. And there's no reason to take the amount of medications out that he did unless it was for something sinister.
So um, they showed you basically their cards, which is a risk, right, for them,
Oh, yeah.
because you could have very easily, number one, I would think someone, I look back to some of the close friends I have, even if you see it, you're like, okay, they had to have made something up. How could this be possible? The risk that you would go back to him, the risk that also they weren't showing all their cards to the hospital either. So the risk that you would go to the hospital and say, okay, this is what they have. Because I would think at this point, and if memory serves, you were a single mom at the time, you're risking, I would think, some potentially your safety to an extent, potentially your job. Charlie had a history of stalking people as well. If he particularly got fixated on someone to the point of breaking in someone's home. Um, I can imagine the shock you were in, but then also the strength of being able to cover that shock when the risk manager came back in the room.
And Danny did not say to me, "Don't share this with anyone." I just knew. I knew from his
Instinctively knew.
I knew from his body language. I knew from just the way that he showed that to me after she left. He never asked me to keep it from the hospital, not once. And I just knew. I knew I wanted to help, and it was also seeing the evidence was also frightening because if I saw it, then I knew the hospital had seen
Had
it.
to have seen it, had to have noticed
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
Because if you saw it, then another one of them had to have seen it. Thank you, Linda DB, for just a second. I'm gifted 5 memberships, and I saw Lord Divinity said gifted 5 memberships to the channel as well. So I appreciate you guys. Um, the other thing too, after you leave, did you go back to work? Did you go home right after?
I drove home and I don't remember driving home.
I can
I
imagine that your car went into autopilot,
Yeah.
and you're just there's just the stun of the information. So,
Yeah,
had you talked to Charlie that day, or did you talk to him that day at all? Not at that point. Okay.
no, I at that point I actually called my friend Donna, who was Charlie's other best friend, and we talked on the phone for hours, just crying and trying to understand. And that was also when I made the decision to protect her as well. I was not going to let anyone know how close she had been to Charlie because I didn't want her involved. She was so
Yeah.
afraid.
Yeah, I can understand. I mean, I think it would be completely natural to be afraid because we all want to protect, what we have and protect. The other thing is from the detective's point of view, and I would think from yours as well, we're on a time clock because you don't know when someone else is going to hire him.
Not only that, just because we were investigating all of these incidents in a hospital,
Mhm.
we did not know that that was not carrying over into the community. We didn't know.
That's a good point because I know that when he got divorced, one of the things his ex-wife, and I'm going to use the word allege, although it's something you can kind of get there in your head about, hurting animals, torturing animals, poisoning animals. So you really have to wonder if he was doing it with people around him that we may or may not know about.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
so you and I can't imagine too from a mom when he did see his children, how terrified that had to have been. But from I'm thinking my perspective from listening to a friend, you're like, yeah, his ex is crazy. That kind of thing comes in. So he really did have a um not gonna say tragic life, but a lot of things tend to happen to him. He tended
Yeah,
to bring a lot of things on.
yeah, absolutely.
And he didn't mind sharing that with everybody. It seems like everything was done kind of to him versus something just happened. So you go home. So how long is it after that initial conversation? Do you have the second conversation with the detectives?
The detectives came to my home the next day and brought a huge amount of paperwork for me to just point things out for them, and they just decided we're just putting this all on the table. At that time I did not understand how much the hospital was trying to sideline their investigation. I did not know how deep it went, that the hospital was trying to protect itself.
Yeah, because and just again for those who don't know the story, the hospital didn't exactly what I would say immediately self-report. It wasn't like they were on with the police department saying, "We think we've got a problem on our hands." They'd actually contacted Poison Control for some help with the math on figuring out what was happening with some medication. He told them to go to the police. They didn't. Um, weren't exactly very quick with giving records to the police or being or explaining anything. I mean, the risk manager could have had the same conversation you did looking at this machine. Texas Jen said, "I'm a nurse. I have a question about the Pyxis system when we get there." Yeah, just put your question down, Texas Jen, and I'll read it off. And then the expert. Glad you guys are back. Said Tisha's been talking about you for weeks. I have. This is
Mhm.
so awesome. Thank you for coming on and sharing your story. So
Oh, thank
absolutely,
you
yes, I
all.
have been super excited about this. For since you and I had the initial conversation. So when they come to your house, tell us about what you can about that conversation. So did you understand completely what they were wanting you to do, or did you think it was just a follow up interview?
I really just thought that it was a follow-up just to point some things out to them, and I didn't have time to talk to Danny about what I saw on the Pix on those Pixis printouts. He didn't understand what I saw on those Pixis printouts. And so that's what I thought I would be talking to them about. However, during that meeting, it was the risk manager who called me on the phone while they are in my house, and she essentially told me I was not supposed to be talking to them,
Talk about
which,
a karma trying to give you a hint,
oh
right?
yeah, oh yeah. And it was very much like I had started asking the detectives, well, where are all the patient records? And they said, oh no, this is everything. I said, no, it's not. You would be able to see in Cerner all of our patient records. You would be able to see where he went. He has a roadmap inside these computers that you can find. And the hospital had not turned anything over to
And can
them
you
for that.
unpack for those who may not understand what CERNA actually is? It's a
So
computer system.
Cerner,
Yeah.
Cerner is a it is all of the medical records. So when your healthcare representatives, when your physicians, your nurses are typing into their computers, all of those things have a timestamp.
Okay.
So every single time that you go into someone's chart, it's a timestamp to show how long you were in there and what you were looking at. And I knew this, and I know that the hospital knew this. The detectives certainly didn't know that. And
No,
so
no.
when I started telling them that, and then having the risk manager telling me not to talk to them, they said, would you be willing to help us? Would you come to the station? Would you be willing to help us with this and help us decipher what was happening with Charlie? And then that turned into them asking me to record phone calls with him.
Well, and you actually asked your daughter, is that right?
My sweet daughter, it
Okay.
was, yes. And that is really a story into itself. I was her drama teacher,
And how old was she at this point?
11,
About
11.
11. Okay. I knew she was like elementary school age.
Yes. And I was very, very sick at that time. I was actually on the heart transplant list. I was diagnosed with electrical cardiomyopathy. And so I needed my job. I needed my
Yeah.
health
And you
insurance.
needed the health insurance, just not from the fact that just, your family's depending on you. And I can imagine what this stress was doing to you physically, but we'll talk about that in just a second. But so you go to your daughter, and how do you have that conversation with an 11-year-old?
Essentially, what I told her is that there is a possibility that I could stop someone from harming people, that we do believe that this person harmed a lot of people and no one has been able to stop him, and that we had an opportunity to help that. However, no one could know about it. It would have to be a secret, and there was a possibility that it may look to other people if any of it comes out, because I won't be able to tell them that perhaps I was part of that, that they may think that I was not just friends with him, but maybe I would also be implicated in people's eyes. And there was a possibility we might have to move. I wouldn't
Yeah.
be able
Yeah.
to, we don't know, but I would never be able to share that. It would have to be a secret. And I said, if you really feel like this is too scary for you, I will do it in a way that I will do it completely behind the scenes and not. And she said, Mom, he's hurting people. Like, of course we have to help them. So it was just so insane to think that this 11-year-old had this intense moral compass that was like, I don't care about my social life.
That
I
a
don't care
lot
what
of people
happens.
before her did not have,
Yes.
because if they had,
Yes, and here I was
right,
dealing with this risk manager who her job was so much more important than protecting patients.
right, it was
So
protecting the hospital and the
she
shareholders.
was protecting the bottom line,
Yeah.
and yes, there was nothing that would have made me do that. There was nothing. No job was worth that ever. No
I can
career
imagine
was
too the
worth that.
stress for you from, like I said, putting your job on the line, reputation on the line, not to mention your health and the impact that that was having.
It was a very, very rough time in my life, and yes, I was literally risking my life and
Yeah,
potentially
yeah.
not knowing how bad Charlie was, and was I risking my daughter's lives as well? Was I?
What I would think at this point too, even though right, you're seeing this evidence in front of you, I would think it would still be hard to reconcile that with this friend still to an extent. So, was there some level, because I putting myself kind of in your shoes, I would think there's some level of feeling like, okay, what if this isn't true and I'm betraying my friend?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I felt that, except I was able to see it wasn't someone else's version of what was happening. I was able to make up my own mind over and over again to see it on paper. I could see it. It was black and white to me. And I adored Charlie. And it was really, really hard for me to lie to him.
Yeah.
I had to find a way to reconcile doing all of these things without lying to him. And I did learn to talk to him in a way that was just trying to understand what was happening in his life and never actually lie to him.
So they tell you that they need your help kind of deciphering the medical, and kind of helping them with their um the breadcrumbs, so to speak, because they were definitely there, but they couldn't see what they were. I mean, it wasn't like he was really trying to hide what he was doing very much. It
No.
was pretty much he at this point, and I would think too, if I had, gotten away with something, and this is my ninth hospital, the boldness of it increases, and I would think my likelihood of doing it more would increase, because obviously people should be catching me, but they're not catching me.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep going. So wait, did that did the idea of going from becoming Detective Amy, as you were called in the book, to actually wearing a wire? So how did that conversation pan out? How did you go from analytics basically to direct involvement?
So we found out that Charlie got a job. And
Okay.
so Tim and Danny, the detectives, decided that this was much more urgent. We had to keep him out of any type of patient care realm. And
Yeah.
so they asked me if I would be willing to meet with him face to face and wear a wire. And that part of it was daunting. I was very, very scared. And at that point, I would have done anything to make it right, because I, at that point, just felt so much guilt for not
Hmm.
seeing it right in front of me, that I would have done anything to make sure that I could not only help these victims that didn't have a voice, but to give some solace to these families.
Well, not just that, you were making sure that there weren't more victims. I mean, I can totally empathize with the feeling guilty and I should have seen, but the reality is everything I've read, and it's been a lot over the course of the last couple of weeks, there wasn't anything that, and maybe even from outward looking in, hey, that would have been, but when you're talking about in the job, the way everything works, there was nothing that would have told you what he was doing until you had that in front of you. But you think about the victims that he didn't have because of you, right? Because there's no indication that he had any plans on stopping. And some of the quotes that I've seen attributed to him was he wasn't going to stop. He wanted someone else to stop him, so to
He
speak, but
did,
he wasn't going to stop.
yeah. And he did say those words to me when I saw him in prison. He did tell me that he was not going to stop.
So how does the wire process work? Talk me through how those conversations and what timeline, because again, with the book and the movie, it kind of makes it seem like it's shorter than it probably was. So
So he and I were friends for about a year and a half, and the investigation that I was involved in was only about a month.
a month. Okay.
So I went in with the wire. He got fired around um, Halloween, and
Hmm.
then I went in with a wire the middle of December.
Okay. Okay.
So by the middle of December, they had decided they needed to really rein him in. And so, yes, they had to, as I essentially had to kind of strip down to I had just like a tank top and bra on, and then a tech was wiring me up. And he saw that I had a scar, and he asked me what that was for, and I told him that I had a pacemaker, and he said,
Hmm.
"We're not doing this." And I said, Of course we're doing this. I'm a cardiac nurse. It's fine. Like, I know
Right.
it's fine."
Right. Right.
Truly, I didn't know that it was fine, but I knew that I
But
was
you
there
knew what you
and
wanted to
doing
do.
it.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
doing it. I was going in, I was doing it. And so, yes, they had to wire everything up so that there was a microphone that he couldn't see. And then there was a black box that they had to essentially duct tape around my belly and into the small of my back. And then I had an oversized shirt on. I had another mechanism that was in my front pocket. And so it was supposed to be fail safe. And when we did get to the restaurant, both of those, they were able to record most of it. And then when Charlie gave me at least a confession to
Hmm.
say that he definitely did it, he didn't say the words, he just didn't deny it.
He didn't deny
During
it.
during that confession, he the wire malfunctioned. So
Goodness. Well,
y-
and you're also trying to act somewhat normal, which I don't think there is such a thing, but with all the
no,
stuff attached to you, I'm sure that there were nerves, but you also don't want to make him stressed out. So walk me through the conversation at the restaurant. How did you keep your voice under control or not show any outward? I mean, obviously, I get the least bit hot, I get the least bit nervous, my face lights up like Rudolph's nose, right? So my cheeks get pink. Even the little ring light I have brings out the red. So how did you keep your body in check, your voice in check, your breathe? How did that
I'm
happen? How did
I'm
you get through that, I guess, is the best question I'm asking.
I'm a trauma nurse. I'm an
Okay.
ICU nurse. My entire life, for at that point, it was 16 years of me running codes. And there was something that happened to me that I could disassociate in the moment.
Right. I know you've been through
And
some trauma before that yourself personally. Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. And I've been around monsters before. So
Yeah.
I knew how this worked. And I think that my situation and growing up the way that I did with the type of trauma that I had, I did understand how to talk to these people. I did understand it, and I understood it on a cellular level. So and really all I had to do was just be myself and let
Yeah.
him know how much I truly cared for him.
Which was true, and even still
It
true at
was,
that point. Even absolute, and that's I guess the tragic thing for you is that that was absolutely true that you did care about him.
I
So
did.
how did you get him talk? How did that conversation unfold? of course, we've seen the scene and I've read the book, but how did you get him talking? Because
And
you're not in a private place, you're in the restaurant.
yeah,
So,
and
yeah.
he actually brought with him five newspaper articles written about him. He was actually very proud of them. And finally, after, the scene in the movie just shows that we were in there for a couple of minutes, and it wasn't. It was a couple of hours.
I would think, yeah. I've
And
read it was longer than
so
that.
by the end of our conversation, I had said to him, I've been a nurse for 16 years. I think I had been a nurse at that time. And I said, I've never had someone believe that I would hurt someone. And I
Because
said,
at this point, I mean, it was not a stretch of the mind to think that, okay, they're targeting me now. Because if you were not involved in, like I said, being Detective Amy, it would have been logical for the police to have looked at you as well as him based on the shifts and different things. So I can see where how you could get him to go there.
at that point, I didn't. At that
Okay.
point, I didn't. I just said that I know you did this. I know you did this, and I'm still here. And I'm here because I knew that you did this, and because I love you. And
Because I care about
because,
you.
yeah, I care for you. And why don't we just go in together? I'll be with you the whole time. And he switched from being my friend to this cold, hard, very dark, empty person. Everything changed about him. His demeanor, his posture, he had a smug look on his face. He
He
became
wasn't your friend at that point. He was
no,
somebody else.
he became the murderer.
So the recording equipment fails right when it shouldn't have failed. But you couldn't script that better. So where do you go from there?
They arrested him, and
Okay.
I thought it was over. I didn't realize that the wire had failed. They took him in, and I went to my Christmas party. It was the Christmas party. I went into the station, I gave my rendition of what happened, and then I got dressed up and went to a Christmas party, went to work the next day, and I got a call from Tim Braun,
One of the
the
detectives. Yep.
one of the detectives, and he said that Charlie would not talk, and he was wondering if maybe I could try again. And I said, yeah, I could do that. So the next day I went in to talk to Charlie again face to face.
And at
And
this point, he doesn't really realize that you're working with the police per se. He
no,
thinks that you're coming in there as, a bomb and a hey, what's going on? Let me be here for you.
yes, yes. And so I went in, and yes, I then was able to have enough of a conversation with him that he really did feel like I could be implicated. And he was also really scared of his daughters being dragged through a trial.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
So
can imagine. And then at this point, he's got another child on the way too, correct?
at that point, he
Okay.
did.
At
Yes.
this point, he
Mhm.
has a third on the way.
Yes.
So after he admitted to, from what I've read, everywhere from 39 to 40.
Well, the only reason that those numbers are so low is because Charlie obviously only admitted to those killings the unalivings that he was certain that what he did caused their demise. And also they can only prove certain deaths.
Right,
So
right.
they couldn't just take his word for it. They had to still prove it. So that's why that number is so low, and the actual number is around 400.
We got a couple of questions. From Squad Bob, hello. Do we know if he seemed to justify his actions in his own mind?
He did not justify them. He was not a mercy unaliver. This was not euthanasia. He
Well,
would
and
turn.
why do you think some media, because I even look back at some of the old newspaper articles that came out, and that's almost how they were trying to spin it, that it was
Well,
the
it was.
angel of death versus the bringer of death. And that
That's
I found that a very interesting headline.
that's because during his confession, he I was still there during the confession, and
Yeah.
he was still being very performative.
Okay.
However, I saw the evidence. I saw the medications that he used. And if he had planned on doing things mercifully, there were thousands of medications he could have used that would not harm
That's
them.
what because the medication choices
Hmm.
essentially physically locked them in to
He
where
would
they couldn't move.
he would use paralytics,
Yeah.
and then he would tell them he was sending them to their maker.
And I mean, you can't communicate, can't move. And of course, the doctors, it's not like we can hook humans up like a car to a computer and immediately know what's wrong. So even some of the things I would think that they tried to do to help may have not even been the right thing to do under the circumstances. But yeah, I found
He
it interesting.
also he also would inject the bags that we hung on
Right, I
the
was going to bring that
station,
up.
and he wouldn't know who was getting that particular bag of solution.
But
So,
because he could go in and see the timeline,
yes.
then he could see the result of what he did
Yes.
without him actively being the one doing it. So
Yeah.
it's almost like a I think playing God is an overused statement, but more of a playing God than a direct
It
hit.
wasn't
He's
God.
controlling
It was
everybody in a lot of ways.
He wasn't playing God. He was having fun.
He was having fun.
He was.
Crystal Clear, hello, says you would think they would modernize the wire technology, and they have. You got to remember, guys, that this was 20 years ago. And plus, there's a difference too with police departments on what type of resources they have. So one may have some, even then had something better than another.
Well,
But
there were two things also.
okay,
We were in a restaurant that in the movie it shows us in a diner. We weren't. We were actually in a sports bar. So
okay,
during that time, one of the games came on, so there was a lot of
a lot
yelling,
of
like a lot of
noise.
guys that were in there just yelling, and they put the music on so loud that our voices were so muffled that they couldn't even decipher
Couldn't
really.
make it out.
Yeah.
Let's see what else. Let's try that one. Scott Cardinal, this is a great guest, fascinating story. I agree. Thank you. Expert, Tish, this is a great scream, great guest, great chat. Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, he still doesn't know that you were the informant, and you still had some conversations with him while he was in jail, correct?
I did. I
You went to
did.
go see him, and some letters back and forth.
Letters back and forth, and then I did go and see him in prison 9 years after, and it was very, very emotional. But
Why did you continue to go see him? And why
um,
did you continue to talk and reach out to him? I think I know the answer, but I'm just curious as to what you'll say.
so the actual answer is I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I Charles Graeber, who was writing the book
Mhm.
and investigating this, asked me if I would go and see him. He, Charles Graeber had been seeing Charles Cullen. I think he saw him almost 50 times while he was in prison, while he was writing his book, and then Charlie just said he wasn't going to see him anymore. So
Do you know
Charles,
why he decided not to see him anymore? Was it
yeah,
just a okay, so why was he not seeing him anymore?
he was so mad about the article that Charles Graeber wrote about him, and
Oh, okay.
not like that Charles Graeber did not paint him out to be a hero, and that he didn't blame the hospital more for what happened.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
it's like he wanted him to put more responsibility on the hospital.
Charlie told me that it was really the hospital. The hospital should have stopped him.
Which
He
I don't disagree, but
it,
it's
it,
interesting. That deflection's interesting to me.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that just shows his level of detachment from what he really did. And he did not want to be caught. He did not want to stop.
Mm-mm.
And the only reason that he did stop was because I caught him.
Yeah, yeah, because without you, everything would have been it would have been very difficult to have prosecuted him and won because everything what there wasn't a there wasn't a smoking gun, there wasn't A to B. You couldn't really draw a straight line with all of it. It was still in a lot of zigzags everywhere.
Danny Baldwin and his team did an amazing job with their investigation. And by the time I did go in to get that confession, they had already exhumed a body. They had
Yes, yes,
they had
yes.
so much.
The Reverend
Florian Gall.
Loughren gone. Yep, yep. Because I remember them talking to his sister about his sister
Yeah.
was a nurse and she had
Yes.
felt like something wasn't right about this
Exactly.
at all.
Yeah. So they did have a really, really good case and they had worked so hard on it. And I was just the cherry, but they
Yeah.
already had Sunday.
And I still think you getting the confession, I mean, even if you're, I'm imagining going, trying to be in front of a jury, making all sense of all this medical stuff. Without you, I still think it would have been very difficult. I think you need to give yourself more credit than you are when it comes to that. So he's to continue to correspond with you until he got a copy of the book.
And we haven't spoken since.
Have you, you haven't, I would assume you haven't tried to contact him at this point in a while.
No, and of course, I did have a couple of his family members reach out to me, and they've just been so wonderful. They've just
Oh,
been so
wow.
sweet, and they are they're just so grateful that someone cared enough about him to help him stop.
So that's how that and, I would think too, if I had someone I loved, I would wanna see it that way too,
Yeah,
as cared enough about him to help him stop.
yeah,
That's an interesting way of looking at it. Um,
yeah.
so do you and I've seen some interviews where you said, have you heard from victims' families after
I
especially after everything came out and it kinda resurfaced everything again?
I have spoken to a couple of the victims' families. However, many of the families, what I believe anyway, and just from hearing things, is that they have a gag order because there were so many civil suits. And
Right,
so
right.
after those civil suits are done, they're not allowed to talk about it. The ones that did reach out to me in private were they were so wonderful, and I was so glad that I got to talk to them.
And like I said, not to mention the victims that never became victims. I mean, the numbers are probably staggering. Do you think he knows how many, or do you think it just became so much of the normal of him? Do you think he actually knows how many and all their names, or you think
He
they are just numbers on a page?
He would not know,
He
all of
probably
them.
has no idea.
There's no way. There's no way that he could have. However, he's quite aware at the magnitude of his destruction. Quite
He's
aware.
serving 11 life sentences, correct?
I don't know how many life
I think
sentences.
the last thing I read, I think was 11. So how are you? How do you heal from that? How do you heal from the loss of a friend that, may even consider a best friend? How do you heal from that? How do you resolve everything and how do you help your family through it? So how are you today and how did you get there?
Well, I wasn't able to talk about it for almost 10 years. And during that time, I went on a very, very deep spiritual quest to figure out why I cared for someone so dark. And it took me on some painful roads, and I am happy to say that I have healed so deeply. It's very, very emotional for me when I talk about it, and I'm so glad that I'm emotional about it, because for so many years I had lost my emotions. When you're a trauma nurse and an ICU nurse, you disassociate from your feelings.
Mhm. I can
And
imagine that you would have to,
yeah, you have
at
to.
least to an extent.
Absolutely,
So
because
today you are, and I'm gonna say this wrong, and I'm gonna apologize, a Reiki master? Did I say that anywhere close to
so
correct?
I'm a hypnotherapist, Reiki master.
Okay.
I teach meditation. I have had many spiritually transformative experiences, and I teach others how to help their own mental health through using many of these spiritual modalities that I was looking to help heal myself, and in the process I can now help other
Help
people.
other Continue to help other
I
people.
do. I do. And I teach for therapists, I teach them different hypnotherapy techniques to help survivors of childhood abuse.
Gotcha. And I did in the show description, I've got your Instagram site up there. I'll put your website up there as well. So, and we're coming in on the close of the hour, and I want to honor your time, but I want to
Mm,
thank you so much for coming on. I know this has got to still be painful. Even 20 years, the older I get, the shorter time that seems. It just depends. But
ag-
if you have not checked out the documentary and the movie on Netflix, I'm going to suggest that you do. But I'm also going to steer you more towards the book, because I think Charles Graver put this in, a very difficult topic in a very well balanced story, meaning that while it's very clear that, Charlie's responsible for Charlie, it also balances that with, what he went through and the mistakes that were made. And she and I were talking before we went on about, how I think it put a lot of people on their guard too when it came to hospital care and asking more questions and making sure that, you understand. We were joking. My grandmother that recently passed, they had a private nurse with her because they were worried she was making everybody mad because somebody didn't get their medication. She was calling the director. So, I think it changed. I think it also probably the impact won't be known, you know, this side of the afterlife on how many, not only in people that you saved, but also changes that were made in the way things are done in hospitals. Miami Spice said this has been a great show. Tish, thank you,
mm,
Amy. Ann PR 1802. I work as a secretary at a hospital too. I know about Cerner and Pyxis. Awesome. Awesome.
mm.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We're going to close out. If you'll hang on just a second, we'll chit chat a little bit. But guys, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to listen. Amy, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank
Again,
you.
this gives you a story of listen and pay attention. Something doesn't feel right, go with it, but also how one person can make such a difference. And I'm going to even guess impact of thousands and thousands of lives in what didn't happen, but then also in the justice for the people it did happen to. So this is Tish. I will be back. I will actually not be back next week. I'm going to put on a recording of an interview I did with Southern Savers because I will be traveling. But we will see you on the 26th. And thank you guys.